I'm going to design the upgraded land for reuse. The autonomous piloting system will.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining this session. My name is Will Miller. I'm the Executive Director of Institutional Analytics Effectiveness and Strategic Planning at Jacksonville University. And the real purpose of tonight's session is to share the role of my office on campus, what we work on a daily basis, and then also show you what we do with student data, institutional data, where students and yourselves will be able to access some of that information. And then also answer some of your questions that you may have data-wise already as you think about Jacksonville University in the upcoming fall semester. Being completely transparent, hopefully most of the questions you have I'll be able to answer immediately this evening. Some questions may require me to do a little digging and get back to you either tomorrow or soon thereafter. So we'll see what we can tackle. When it comes to analytics and planning on the Jacksonville University campus, the mission and vision are pretty simple. Our goal is to make sure that we're strategically using the data that we have and the data that we collect to fulfill our mission. And ultimately that mission is the success of students. We make sure we achieve goals and then make sure again that our students, faculty, and staff are successful. And the vision piece that we're building towards and we've made significant progress on in my year at JU is to really work towards asking what I consider provocative questions and then really figuring out ways to implement courageous answers. And to be honest, the vision that I've had for my office has been pushed forward even by what's happening with COVID-19 is higher ed has had to think outside the box in ways that historically it's not exactly been known for. And the fact that in higher ed we've had to become more of a jet ski in terms of how we respond to things as opposed to a very slow barge that takes 10-15 minutes to really make turns and make moves. And when we think about the role that we have in analytics and planning, there's three really quick stories I'm going to share with you that kind of hit on the key areas that we focus on. One being a story about a young farmer that focuses on our analytics angle, one being about blind individuals and the elephant looking at assessment, and then one being about children in a river that focuses on what we do with student success and how we engage your students in proactive student success efforts, as well as faculty, staff, alumni, the community, and the like. So we'll start with the tractor story. The tractor story is pretty straightforward. There's a young farmer who buys a large plot of land and decides this is going to be where he sets up his lifelong farm. The problem is he doesn't know a whole lot about farm equipment. One day he has a tractor out in the field, he's just getting going, and his tractor stops working. And the young farmer has no idea what's wrong. He tries everything he can think of. And ultimately he goes back to the house, depressed, unsure of how to continue. And his wife suggests that he reaches out to the old farmer who lives down the street. So the young farmer calls the old farmer, tells the old farmer, hey, I'd really appreciate if you'd come out, take a look at my tractor and tell me what I can do. I'm new to this, I'm lost, I just need some assistance. And the young farmer invites him over whenever he needs to be there, could be there. The next day, the old farmer shows up bright and early in the morning. He walks around the tractor, walks around the tractor, walks around the tractor once more, asks the young farmer for a hammer, walks up to the tractor, hits the tractor with the hammer as hard as he can. The tractor starts, everything's working, everything's solved. Young farmer tells the old farmer, I have no idea what you did, but I really appreciate it. Send me a bill for what I owe you. I can't tell you how great this is. I can get back to work. This is wonderful. Next day, the bill shows up. Bill from the old farmer says $1,000 for repairing your tractor. Young farmer says, no way am I paying this. This is insane, $1,000. All he did was beat up my tractor with a hammer. This is ridiculous. And he thinks he can get one over on the old farmer and emails him back and says, I just need the itemized bill for tax purposes. And the old farmer within 20 minutes sends him back another bill. And he sends in the email and says, all I did was hit your tractor with the hammer. $1 for hitting your tractor with the hammer, $999 for knowing where to hit it. When it comes to analytics and it comes to the use of data at Jacksonville University, from a decision-making perspective, the role of my office is to help make sure that we know where to hit the tractor, that we are not expending energy, resources, time into things that aren't going to work, not benefit students, not help us move forward and progress as an institution to our fullest potential. So we're always looking at making sure that we know where to hit the hammer. When it comes to the elephant, when it comes to assessment, when it comes to making sure that what we do has the positive impact that we expect, this is really a parable that some of you may have heard before, but it involves a group of 6 blind men stumbling upon an elephant. And they're out in the woods, they have no idea what they've stumbled upon, and they're trying to figure out what in the heck this thing is. And what ultimately happens is all 6 men touch and reach out and try to assess different parts of the elephant from their own vantage point. So one individual is feeling the elephant's trunk, and as it squirms, thinks this could be some type of large snake. Another individual is feeling the elephant's tail and thinking maybe this is just a piece of rope or something similar. And it ends up with huge disagreement about what this object is in front of them. And currently, when we think philosophically, it's used to discuss religious intolerance, it's used to discuss moral relativism. But from an assessment perspective, what's important here is when we think about assessing the elephant, it's about determining a way to take multiple perspectives on something and look holistically at the greater picture. Every individual student that we have at Jacksonville University is a data point, and they are multiple data points every single day. We need to be thinking holistically in how we can assess the entire elephant, as opposed to getting stuck on focusing on one thing. Because when we focus on one thing, we tend to focus on convenience. We tend to focus on something that supports what we want to find, as opposed to actually looking holistically at what we're looking to accomplish. And then lastly, there's the children in the river. And this is where the student success piece comes into place. When we think about the success of your student at Jacksonville University, we want to make sure that we're getting at the root of problems, preventing problems, identifying problems as early as we can in a particular process, as opposed to waiting till it's too late. So the story of the river is a group of friends are out of the river, getting ready to go kayaking, and they're sitting right around a bend. And 5 minutes into being at this location, they see a small child struggling inside of the river, clearly needing help. So one of the friends jumps into the river and goes and saves the kid. Not more than 10 minutes later, here comes another kid down the river around the bend again. Same situation, different friend jumps in, goes and saves the kid. 10 minutes later, it repeats itself yet again. This time though, one friend jumps in to save the kid, and another friend starts sprinting up the river, running alongside as fast as he can. And when he comes back later, his friend's asking, where'd you go? We were trying to save these kids and you're running around like crazy. And he said, he's like, you all saved the kids. I stopped the man who was throwing children in the river. When it comes to student success, our goal is to use data and information as proactively as possible to prevent problems before they arise, to keep students on pace, to keep students on track to graduate, to continue to engage with Jacksonville University. And the way that we do all 3 of these things, whether it's hitting the tractor in the right spot, assessing the elephant in a meaningful way, or ensuring that we are getting at the root cause of problems, is by using institutional data. And I can tell you, as a campus with 4,000 students, we have data all over campus. The Academic Affairs Office and faculty have all sorts of data on students, whether that's course evaluation results, grades, assignment grades, attendance, very meaningful data as we think about doing our jobs and making for student success. The Financial Aid Office has lots of data on students. They know what students and families are capable of paying, what they're receiving in aid from the institution. They have good ideas on payments. The President's Office, the administrative offices, the business office, they all have data. Student Affairs has data. Who's engaging with who? Who's engaging with what clubs? Who's active? Where are students located in terms of residence halls, on campus, off campus? We have all of this data. What we tend to be missing in higher education, and the role of my office to help fill, are the connections between these data points so that we can holistically look at what's happening on campus at any given time. And we have the ability to work through issues as they arise, or hopefully before they arise, to ensure that students are put in the best path forward. This approach means really 3 things. It allows for 3 things. The first, as I mentioned earlier, is provocative questions. In a session like this, in all honesty, I'm hoping that some of you ask questions later or type in questions or email me with questions that push me to figure out how the best way to measure data and answer is. We want to be willing to ask questions that are not easy answers, that are difficult to go through. And it allows us to actually provide courageous answers. One thing you'll learn about Jacksonville University is, like a lot of higher ed institutions are very traditional. It's incredibly easy to predict from semester 1 to semester 2 exactly how things will go. And in all honesty, at a lot of places, things are stale. Things haven't changed, advanced, or developed. Here, we look for the courageous answer, even if sometimes it's a little outside the box. And most importantly to me personally is it allows for transparency. When we bring the data together, when we're working to make sure we know where to hit the tractor, how to assess the elephant, and how to save the children, it allows us to actually share the information that we're basing our decisions off of in a very public way. We have a tendency, especially internally, to own areas of weakness and to celebrate areas of strength. And that's even easier done, more easily done when we have this type of data. So with that, we'll talk about a few top line data points. And then we will get into showing some of our dashboards and talking through some of those. People like rankings. They like to talk about rankings. And just to give you a sense of some of our highlights in rankings, US News and World Report, last year we were the 28th top regional university in the South. That was the highest ranking for Jacksonville University. Some of the features that have led to that ranking are obviously our small class sizes, the student to faculty ratio, our graduation rate versus expected graduation rate, including for lower income students, and our peer assessment scores. If you look at the site called Learn How to Become, which really goes and looks at career development, JU was ranked number 3 in the state of Florida, and that includes obviously all of the state schools as well. If you look at What Will They Learn, which is a nonpartisan outside group that actually measures core curriculum standards in terms of what your students will be exposed to in general education and kind of the soft skill job competencies, JU is actually tied for the number 1 rated core curriculum in the state of Florida based on what we offer and what we require of our students. And then if you look at the Center of Education and Work from Georgetown University, and this might be the data point that carries the most weight given what families invest in sending their students to Jacksonville University. If you look at the 40-year net present value of a degree from Jacksonville University, we are number 6 in the state, and we are the top 500 in the country of all higher ed institutions. And again, to be completely transparent, the schools that tend to stay ahead of us here in Florida, institutions like Florida Tech, some of the health science schools, institutions that place students almost immediately into set medical or tech career paths, which again is just a very different setup and a very different structure. If we think about our vital signs, and again, some of the things that we get asked about most frequently, obviously head count's one. Fall 2019 head count was 4,129 students. I will show you some dashboards today that look at our current enrollments for the fall. And I can share openly that as of today, our enrollments are trending to be above that number for the fall still in terms of registration and new students coming. And out of that student body of 4,129 students, approximately 63% are female and 46% are non-white, including approximately a 22% African-American student population. Fall 2020 retention was just under 73%. I'll also share with this group that as of today, our retention for our freshmen from last year sits at about 72.3%, which while it is a little bit lower, the one dynamic that I would like to make sure we remember there is that with the shuttering of our football program, that led to 40 freshman football players having to decide whether to continue at JU or continue playing football elsewhere. If you take football players out of the equation, the fall 2021 or fall 2019 freshman class retention rate looks closer to about 77, 78%. Our student faculty ratio is 11 to 1. Almost all of our classes have fewer than 30 students. Actually, most have fewer than 20 students. We have 4 or 5 class sections a year that are over 50 students, and that's it. And those are typically large honors colloquiums, music courses where it's really about attending events and we list it as 100 students, but there's not necessarily a face-to-face class component. And then as parents and family, perhaps the most important piece, if we look at our 2019 graduates, what you see there in terms of career outcomes is 91% are employed or continuing education within 6 months of graduation at an average starting salary of $62,400, which puts us roughly $9,000 above other institutions in Florida on average. So that's a big takeaway there. And then what I want to do now is walk into some of our dashboards. So I'm going to look at some of our peer institution benchmarking dashboards, what we have in terms of the freshman class funnel, our current registration numbers for fall, our historical enrollment data, some data on retention and graduation. And then also I'm going to look at, from a student success angle, some of our FINS Pulse poll results. And just to emphasize that, some of your students are likely already getting occasional FinPulse polls. We send them out once or twice a week, sometimes just to continuing students. Sometimes we include incoming freshmen, just sort of depending on what the topic is. And again, that's data that we transparently publish back to our internal audiences to make sure everybody knows the data that's helping to inform decisions as it thinks about the fall semester, the student experience, et cetera. And it's also similar to the data that we're collecting through Nellie the Dolphin through a text bot that may be communicating with some of your students through text message, or in some cases accidentally with some of you, depending on what cell phone numbers we have in our systems. So we'll share some of that information as well. I will openly share that some of these may be a little tough to see on a small screen. And I apologize for that. I'm going to zoom in as much as I can. But recognizing that I can only possibly go so far here. Let me get the zoom in and see if it even lets me zoom. Yeah, some of these aren't even going to let me zoom. I can at least take it to full screen and give us a slightly better chance. This first dashboard we're looking at is actually our peer institution summary. And again, I'm not going to go point by point through these as much as really just attempt to highlight some of the key takeaways. Our peer and aspirant institutions are really running the gamut of across the United States. Last fall, we intentionally sat down and looked at the institutions that are structurally the most similar to us, deal with the same types of students, have the same splits between undergraduate and graduate revenue bases, that focus on the liberal arts core. And again, some of these institutions are more like us than others, to be honest. Again, if you just look at the schools on the list immediately, if you look at a place like Flagler, geographic location plays a factor there. But in reality, they have 0 in the health sciences. They have basically 0 in grad. There's a very different structural base, but their traditional undergraduate core is similar structurally to what we do and how we do it. Same for Eckerd, which, while it is in Florida, is a little different. But ultimately, these peers were decided blindly. We looked at data, we looked at variables that mattered to us, and then we walked through. But it's a useful tool for faculty, staff, current students, families to be able to go in and eyeball and sort of see where things compare between JU and its peers. And it's something that we regularly look at. As we do our internal discussions, this is always something that comes up as an option. So again, here you're seeing raw data, and all of this data is pulled directly from a source called IPEDS. All higher ed institutions have to report annually on a myriad of data points to IPEDS. And this gives us the opportunity to see what that data looks like from a comparative perspective. So you have there, you can zoom in on any particular institution. So obviously here we're looking at JU, and you can get a sense of how applications and admissions and enrollments have gone over time. You can see what that freshman cohort number is looking like over time. You can see what we have in terms of published in-state tuition and fees, which are identical at JU, obviously, for out-of-state students. You can also look at aid awarded. So even though you see tuition going up, you should also note that aid's actually going up at a higher rate. You can see enrollments, you can see net revenues, you can see retention rates, grad rates, whatever you might want to see and look at. You can also look at the student profile. So if we're thinking about what the average student is, you can look at our undergrad and grad enrollments over time, historically, full-time and part-time. The gender distribution, which has remained relatively stable over the last 6 years. You can look at the age distributions, residency status in terms of are students coming from in-state, out-of-state, foreign countries, or unknown. And then also that race and ethnicity distribution, where you can see that over time, the campus has remained quite diverse. In terms of overall diversity statistics, JU is second or third, I forget the exact number, in terms of overall institutional diversity. And it's only trailing the University of Miami for that list at this point. And then ultimately you can get into more detail on each of these. And again, this is a dashboard that's publicly available on the Analytics and Planning website. So you can get in and actually play with this and see. We don't typically advertise this, but while it's really geared towards peers, you can actually go in and say no to peers and then choose any institution in the United States to kind of see how JU compares or stacks up. It's all publicly available data anyways. So it gives us a sense of what this looks like. So there's applicant trends, the percent of applicants that are admitted, and it looks at multiple years. Undergraduate enrollment, so where are these schools comparatively in terms of undergrad enrollment size? Looks at graduate enrollment, looks at retention rates of first-time students, looks at grad rates of first-time students, looks at the total number of degrees that are awarded in any given year, looks at in-state tuition and fees, which again, while JU's price tag is obviously up there, we can notice that compared to peers, it's actually quite average. Institutional grant aid, so how much money is being given to students to help them afford Jacksonville University. Revenue from tuition and fees, so how much money do we actually make off of tuition and fees after we account for discounting? And this really does show you where that discounting amount comes in. We have the sticker price, but in reality, off of that sticker price per student, we make $15.3 thousand, which suggests that there is aid to be had, obviously. And then lastly, it shows instructional expenses per FTE. So how much are we spending out? And I can also share on this one in particular that for JU, there has been a dramatic increase. In 2014, we were spending approximately $7,800 directly on instruction. In 2018, that number has basically gone up at least $3,000. And if you look at the 2019 data when it comes out, it's gone up about another $1,500. And those have been intentional efforts by President Koss since he came back to JU from the board to be president, where he looked and said retention rates need to go up, grad rates need to go up. And the way that we do that is to equip our faculty with the ability to teach as well as they can and to support them in that goal and that mission across the board. So that's a peer institution look. The second one we'll look at is admissions and enrollment. And just to be transparent on this one, we share it internally. Your students should be able to access this by logging into the MyJU portal and then clicking on Analytics and Planning, where they'd be able to see all of our embedded dashboards. And again, this data I have not updated this week, so some of the numbers are lagging a little bit, but you'll get the larger picture sense. So we have our application funnel. So if we actually look through right now and we look at just, we'll start with just the freshman admits that are coming in. You're looking at, in this case, about 700 deposited freshmen. That number's actually gone up. It's sitting at about 730 deposited freshmen today, which would be a record class size for JU, assuming everybody shows. But it walks through how many apps have been started, submitted, what's our yield rate, what's our move to student rate. You're able to go through and look at any particular programs of interest and see this data broken down in that manner. This is the same data, just kind of presented in a table format for folks who prefer the raw data versus the visual. I know we all have different learning types here. And then we get into some of the more demographic data. So if we look at our freshmen, what's the gender split look like? What's the region? So if you look right now, you're at 65% of our deposited students are female. I'm sorry, these are not doing this. This is just applications. So these are admits. Let me get into the actual freshman class. So there's our admits again. Here are our deposits. So now we're into the deposited students. 60% female, 48% coming from Florida, 46% coming out of state. We'll look at the actual map for that in a second, and about 5.5% international. This freshman class is looking about 60% white, 26% African-American, with some small groups that are multiracial, roughly 17% Hispanic, and about 93% US citizens. And then you can see the most popular majors. So you have pre-nursing, aviation management and flight operations, marine science, the general undergrad business, biology, kinesiology. You can kind of work your way through. And again, the average SAT of 1083, ACT of 22.4. Again, it's a test optional institution, recognizing that those numbers only reflect students who have shared and asked for their SAT and ACT information to be included. And an average calculated GPA of 3.6, which is actually up 1/10 of a point from last year approximately. So all positive trends in terms of your students that are joining us soon. And then we can look at the home state map. So this is the application map. So you can get a sense of our strongest areas: Florida, Georgia, Texas, California, Illinois, New York, and that mid-Atlantic region. I would say from an admission standpoint, that's our bread and butter area. So if we look at the deposited freshmen, you can see obviously that Florida is the highest with 335, but you have Georgia with 26, Texas has 15, New York 27. That mid-Atlantic region makes up about 60, 70 students out of that incoming group. And the only states we're missing in terms of the freshman class for this upcoming year are West Virginia, and for some reason what appears to be the Mountain Time Zone plus North Dakota. So just kind of interesting data to look at. We have admitted students for this particular class from all 50 states. So there are offers out there that could still increase what that diversity looks like in terms of home state. And then we have some specific data on athletes just for our athletics folks to be able to look at. And then a master dashboard that lets us track all of this. And again, that's available internally. Your students can go to myju.edu, click onto analytics and planning, and they'd be able to access these embedded. Just because of the nature of this data, we don't share it out publicly in the same way. Third one, we won't spend a lot of time on this one's our registration dashboard for the fall. It was also last updated last Thursday, so some of this data could potentially change. If we look at total enrollment for the fall, as of today, again, you're looking at 2947. That number obviously feels lower than the 4100 I talked about for last fall. We have graduate programs and some partner programs that do not register their students until the end of July, first week of August. There's about 800 of those, 900 of those. So this number will continue to grow, but it allows you to see programmatically what are our largest majors, what are our smallest majors, or at least programs of study for both the undergrads and the grad, where you can slice this down by college. So if you're interested in the college count, and this is reflective of what you normally see, about 890 students in the College of Arts and Sciences, about 713 in the Davis College of Business, about 1,000 in the Brooks College of Health Sciences, and then in the Linda Berry Stein College of Fine Arts, about 244. This is a perfect example. Obviously, we have MFA programs in both dance and music. They enroll late, which is why grad enrollment for fine arts is showing as 0 today. We also have, again, just some more broken down traditional undergrad enrollment, again, showing 59% female, and then walking through some of the ethnicity data that we would anticipate for our fall, depending on what it looks like with registration as it continues. And then if we go to enrollment by home state, this gives you a sense of where we do have students on campus today. So 46 states, West Virginia is still not showing, North Dakota, South Dakota, and then obviously Wyoming as well. But again, those same areas, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, DC, and then the Eastern PA location, Georgia, Florida, Texas, California. Probably no big surprises there for anybody. But again, that's something we routinely track. We look from period to period to make sure that those numbers continue to move in a positive direction. This is our census data file. This is another one that is publicly facing. We take census 2 weeks into every semester, fall and spring. And obviously here you're looking at trends over time. You're seeing enrollments by home states. What you really are probably the most interested in here that you haven't seen previously is if we get into the trends over time. So this actually allows you to look, and this is showing you just one college right now, but if I get into all colleges, that would be JU's historical enrollment from fall 2011 through spring of 20, and also includes obviously the grad undergrad split. So you can get a sense of how there has been growth in graduate education that's then sort of plateaued recently, with emphasis on that continuing to grow, and the ebb and flow of our undergrad enrollment over time as well. And then lastly, you can actually go and look at enrollment trends by degree. So if you want to look at particular programs and see, if I want to look at accounting students over time, I can look and see, obviously with these types of data points, this is really showing you only a difference in 18 students on our y-axis, so it skews the visibility a little bit, but at least gives us a clear sense of what this looks like. And again, this is another one publicly available. You can get on and explore and think about different majors and trends. Importantly, though, I would mention as we talk about provocative questions and courageous answers, all of the data that you're looking at on these dashboards is one data point that informs our conversation. So I always encourage any data consumer to not react strongly to any one particular data point without reaching out and seeking any type of contextual information that can be provided. Last three, retention rates, if we look historically over time. And to be completely transparent, we can talk about these in detail. This is another database that we keep on the MyJU page. So it's not outwardly public facing, but it's available to all internal individuals with JU. And obviously you can see the growth in our retention rate from under 60% in 2010 to, like I said, in that 73, 74 range last year. Some of the dips you see here are, again, contextually explained. 2015, when we fell back to 64.5%, there was a change in football leadership that led to a mass exodus of student athletes. But you can get a sense of what this looks like. You can look at retention rates by your programs, by different majors, by your college, and get a sense of what that runs as. You also have the ability to look at that in a table form. You can see the majors with the highest and lowest retention rates. Again, as I mentioned, if you use one data point, if we're honest here, if we look at something like the BFA in ceramics, you're looking at one single student. So it may be 100%, but that number may not be huge, which is why we share out here the ends as well. And then we have the flip here if we look at 4- and 6-year graduation rates, which are increasing fairly rapidly. Obviously, if you look at the 6-year grad rate, especially 53, 52, 51, we still have students graduating this summer. That 51.4 will end up over 53 by a pretty safe margin after we get done with summer classes. The 2015 and 2016 year cohorts, if you look at them at 47 and 43, they have not hit the point yet where they would have graduated in 6 years. We're projecting the 2015 group to get close to 58%. We're expecting the 2016 group to get over 60, which is much closer to where we would ultimately like to be. And recognizing as well here that the grad rates play off of what you see in terms of the retention rate. If the retention rate for freshman students is 70%, your grad rate can't be higher than 70%. We graduate approximately 72, 73% of our freshman students that come back for the start of their second year on time. So it's a question of, if you get through the first year and you're happy to be here and you're engaged, you're going to likely get out in 4 years, maybe a little longer, depending on what you choose to do and what you choose to study. And again, this does the same thing, just shows you by college and major, so you can see that type of breakdown for 4 years and then for 6 years. Last one, and this is a new one to JU. This is another one shared inside of the MyJU portal for students. And it gives you a sense of student success, how we look. We like to look at grades not as a way of assessing faculty or faculty performance. We look at grades as success measures. So, we obviously have grade trends that we can walk through that show us, here are course grades historically. You can break it down by college, whatever you might choose. The public facing version of this does not have instructor, obviously for instructor privacy, and we don't want this to be a tool used in that way. Grade distributions by college, so you can get a sense of what that looks like. But most importantly is when we actually get into predictive grade capabilities. So for example, I can actually go in and look at students who took Chem 101. And I can see their grade distribution. I can see sort of what they've accomplished or not accomplished. And then most importantly, I can go back and then say, all right, let's see how many students took Chem 301. No, it's not a good example. Let's see how many took Chem 103. I'm just trying to find a good number here. Chem 101 may have been a bad example. Let's do Chem 103. So I have Chem 103, and then I have students that are taking, for example, Chem 104. So if students need to take both of these courses, we want to know which students are most likely to succeed in Chem 103. One of the ways we can do that is by looking here and seeing, here's our Chem 103 grade distribution. I can click on the students who got A's, and I see I had 73 students get A's. And of those 73 students, 31 took the next chem class. 18 got A's, 9 got B's, 3 received a C, 1 earned a D. So we can look and try to figure out where we have areas where a student getting a C in a course, which gets them credit and may not seem like a big deal, ultimately might be a big deal. And we have ways to make that actually even more interactive. We look at our DFW courses, the courses where students struggle the most during their first years. And then we ultimately look at how course grades impact retention and graduation rates. So we can look right here and see if a student takes a course during their freshman year and gets an A, the retention rate is 87%. If they get a B, it's 81. If they get a C, it's 73. If they get a D, it's 61. If they get an F, it's 42. But I could go to any particular course that JU offers and see how that directly impacts. So I know for Accounting 201, this is my breakdown. It's pretty consistent, nothing really jarring. But I might be able to find courses where all of a sudden, if a student gets a C or even a B, for some reason, retention rates or grad rates change dramatically. And we know that even though those grades themselves are not problematic, they're things we might want to think about in the future. This is a good example. There's not a huge N here, but if a student gets an A, retention rate's 84. If they get a B, it's 100. If they get a C, it's 40%. So in Art 101, the C is a sign of a problem. And it's probably something where if a student gets a C, we want to have advisors and faculty reach out to discuss what's going on and what's happening. And then the same thing for grad rates. And then lastly, the Fins Pulse polls. This has not been updated recently. We have about 3 more polls to add. But what's great about the Fins Pulse poll is it comes out through Qualtrics. Students get it emailed. And ultimately what it does is it lets us see what our students are interested in. We care about the student voice. We want their voice included as we think about not just this fall, but as we think about all of our operations. And this is a way to capture that fairly quickly. Our response rates tend to be between 700 and 1,100 students to each of these. So we asked them, way back in May, what they wanted in terms of the fall. Who was interested in online? How willing were they to have different interfaces? So we sort of walked through and saw, a fairly strong preference for the traditional face-to-face classroom, which we've heard over and over again. If we look at concerns, what were they concerned about? And this was, again, a later poll that we could probably revisit at this point. One of their big concerns was other folks not maintaining appropriate social distancing. So it was, I can do my part, but I'm not trusting that others can do theirs. There were concerns about the mask. A lot of students had no concerns. So again, just trying to get a sense of what they're thinking, what they're looking for, and how we can help lead them to success. What excites them, where they're excited to go. We've asked about academic support. So how do they want tutoring to be offered? How do they want different support options to be there? How do they want to eat? What do they want to have available? And again, this data is not driving our decisions, but it's helping us see areas where students maybe don't care about the face-to-face as much, or maybe they care about it more than we might expect. And then we just generally ask how they're doing. We care about our students. We want to know, are they doing well? Are they not doing well? Are they struggling? What's causing them to struggle? And we're seeing a lot of that off of what we're gathering from Nellie the Dolphin. And again, if your student hasn't been texted by Nellie the Dolphin yet, we're updating that list fairly regularly. But we've really tried to make that a tool where students can communicate and get responses as quickly as possible from the appropriate offices. But again, this is data that's transparently available on our website just to kind of show that, here's what our students are telling us. When we ask for data, it's important that we're able to return it. So that's a big picture overview of how we handle analytics, data, student success assessment at Jacksonville University. And I've left us about 5 or 6 minutes. If anybody has particular questions that they're interested in having answered, I'm happy to field those and answer what I can. And if not, I have our office email address up on the screen now, oap@ju.edu. And if you have any particular data questions or things that you're curious about, or how we compare to other institutions that you're mulling over, please feel free to reach out to that email address, in the near future or whenever during your student's journey at JU. And we're always happy to tackle those types of questions and figure out what we can do. I work off the philosophy, if one of you is thinking about it, there's probably dozens more that would be interested in seeing the information. So we always welcome those types of opportunities. So if anybody has questions, I'm happy to take those at this time. I'm opening up the chat here. And if you're not able to see the chat, some of you know on iPhones, we just had a comment about the collection and use of data and the transparency. And yeah, it's from Dave Pittman. And Dave, I'd just say, I mean, that's institutionally for us. I mean, unless there's, you know, a reason to protect this type of data, if we have it available to us, you know, I'm not a fan of collecting data to let it sit in a filing cabinet. Old school institutional research doesn't excite me. It's all about figuring out what we can gather and how we can make this go. So I appreciate that comment very much. Awesome. Well, not seeing any data questions. I can give you all 4 minutes of your evening back. But like I said, please reach out to the oap@ju.edu email address with anything that might be on your mind at any point in time, including, you know, if your student's starting in the fall and hasn't heard from Nellie the Dolphin through text and you want to know why, I can work on getting that set up too. So anything you need, my office is always available.